Building a great B2B go-to-market engine starts with understanding what works and evolving it. I'm your host, Rob Carroll, and this is a go-to-market perspective, where marketing and sales leaders share how they're transforming their organizations, foundational best practices, smart trade-offs, and practical AI delivering value and scale today. Analyst Relations is a discipline close to my heart. First as a Forrester analyst, and then a B2B tech marketer. I've been on both sides of the AR coin, and lucky to have worked with some of the savviest AR pros and analysts in the business. Those who get it understand that AR is not about filling out RFIs and scheduling briefings. It's about building trusted relationships with those most likely to influence your customers' buying decisions, full stop. Today, I'm excited to be speaking with Alyssa Stone, Head of Analyst Relations at Wiz, to unpack how she's balancing foundational relationship building with AI-driven efficiency, how she's positioning Wiz's AI strategy with analysts, and how she's navigating the rapidly disrupted analyst landscape. Alyssa, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Rob.
So let's start off. You've been in the AR world for quite a while. Why don't you share a bit about your background and kind of what your scope of responsibilities at Wiz are today?
Absolutely. So I have been doing AR now for over 25 years, which is a little bit crazy. I did not intend to be an AR lifer, and I've certainly done some other things in my career before, like executive communications, but AR really has my heart. Right now at Wiz, I am leading their Analyst Relations program and strategy. I've been doing that for about 2 years now, and just about 2 weeks now, I hired a wonderful Analyst Relations professional, Julia McAndrew, who I've worked with before, who is going to help me co-lead the Analyst program at Wiz.
Analysts want to know what's going on at Wiz, which means you need more help managing all of those expectations and all those relationships. So congratulations.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
So let's start for the uninitiated, or for those that are, may have some preconceived notions of what AR is all about. What is, in your words, the responsibility of an analyst relations org for a B2B tech firm?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's both a visible part, which I'll talk about, and then also the invisible part, which I actually think, Rob, is more important. So the visible part, and that most people know about, is that you are responsible for ensuring that analysts publish accurate and hopefully positive research about your company. This might be a profile report about a new product launch you have, or the most visible, of course, is the analyst evaluations like Forrester Waves, Gartner Magic Quadrants, IDC MarketScapes, and many of the other independent firms have those as well. So it's making sure that you're positively and accurately represented in that research. But there's also kind of the more hidden influence that's much more important, which is, what are analysts saying to buyers when you're not in the room? So that part of it is making sure that analysts not only understand your strategy and know your products, but also that they trust your company. They trust your executives. They know about your roadmap. They know your product inside and out, so that they feel comfortable putting their professional reputation on the line by recommending that a customer work with you.
A lot of leaders and investors, they just focus on the dots in the evaluations, as opposed to understanding the rolling thunder of influence required to make sure the analysts trust you enough to want to recommend you in their private conversations with their clients. So what does make an analyst willing to recommend a vendor? What is it, because it's one thing for them to score highly. It's another thing for them to actually recommend a vendor.
Absolutely. So I'm going to answer that, and then I'm actually going to flip it back on you as a former analyst. But in my perspective, one of the most important things is they really need to see the product. And that sounds so basic, but I think what a lot of AR pros and product marketers, might fall into this trap of, I want to tell a story, and a really compelling story. And I want to talk about how our company sees the market. And then I want to show these awesome marketecture slides, and then customer case studies. And then 55 minutes into a 1-hour briefing, you might show the product for a little bit, or you might not show it at all. In my experience, one of the most important things that makes an analyst willing to recommend a vendor is having a great product and showing the analyst that product and showing the analyst what they care about in that product. I think that's incredibly important and it's super basic and foundational, but a lot of companies just don't do their product justice and they don't talk about it enough. I think analysts also, like, they're going to have a lot of questions, and we'll talk about kind of executives and working with analysts later. But I think analysts need to be heard, and they also need to have their questions, answered pretty directly and with facts and with someone who's, not going to be really defensive. And I think they need to have that discussion at a pretty high executive level, because then they trust that, first of all, they as the analyst and the analyst community and buyers are important to that company and that executive. And that also, if let's say that analyst then recommends the company to a buyer, that buyer has questions. They know that this is a vendor who is open, who has answers to questions that are out there in the market. And I think that's really important too. And then trust in the roadmap, which means being transparent and talking to the analysts about roadmap, getting their feedback on the roadmap, caring about what they think as well. So there's a lot that goes into it that I think makes an analyst, willing to recommend a vendor. Rob, in your experience and being a former analyst, what made you, really willing to recommend a vendor to your end user customers?
It's funny because it's almost counterintuitive from the vendor perspective, who only wants to show all the shiny, beautiful things.
Yeah.
But the thing that built the most trust for me was when a vendor was honest and candid about what they couldn't do.
Yeah.
It's when I had a question about something, or a client had a question and I was following up with the vendor, and they were saying, that's something we don't do as well yet. It's on our roadmap. It's something we're working on. I would believe the things they said they could do 100 times more. It's amazing the credibility of just admitting that you're not perfect in everything, and how that made me say, this is someone that as a customer I'd want to work with. And as an analyst, I'm like, so when I ask them a question about, can you do this? And they say yes, I'm going to believe them. And I probably won't even need the demo, because they've already earned that trust with me, that if I'm asking about something and they say they can't do something or they're not where they want to be, I'm like, wow, they're actually being honest with me. They're having an honest conversation. It's not like I'm going to put a blog post out saying they admitted they can't do this. I'm discreet, but that honestly, the number one thing before any slideware or demoware was them just being honest and me feeling that I'm getting honest conversation.
Absolutely. That's a great point.
You hinted at this, and this is, I think, a big thing that we've both experienced on both sides of it. When is it appropriate for which executives to be part of an analyst relationship?
Yeah. This to me it's really important for the companies that I choose to work with. And I think it can make or break an analyst relations program and the company's results and reports, along with, a great product and roadmap, of course, is which executives are involved and, at what level and how. I personally think, and it changes based on, do you work for a huge company or a small company? But I think it's really, really important to have the head of product for whatever area that analyst covers, to have them actually be a spokesperson and probably also engaged in the RFI and at least knowing what's being submitted, working on some of those biggest, vision questions. So ideally, product marketing, product management, the lead executives for that area at a minimum need to be engaged. They also need to be just bought in and understanding the value that analysts provide, and not just that you're going to fill out an RFI once a year and brief them and you're going to be a leader. They need to understand that analysts can provide you with so much insight throughout the year as far as informing your roadmap and your messaging. So it needs to be like a genuine executive engagement. And that's going to be my next point, which is you can't try to fit a square peg in a round hole. So there are some executives I've worked with in my past who analyst relations just is not their thing. They don't want to prioritize analyst calls. They immediately get defensive. They don't take feedback. And if that's the case, and if that executive really doesn't want to engage with analysts, then you've got to find another executive. So I think it's that balance of coaching the right executive, really having them form relationships with that analyst throughout the year, having the analyst drive some value back to that product executive and forming roadmap or telling you about the inquiries that they take on that particular area. But then also just don't force it, because I think the analyst can sense that, and it's really uncomfortable if somebody feels like their mom made them like sit on a call and they don't want to be on it.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. And it's about the person, not about the title.
Absolutely.
Do you have like just examples in your career? You don't have to name names, of course, but
Yeah.
an example where an executive engagement really escalated or improved the relationship and the trust level, and maybe the opposite, where an executive engagement went south.
Yeah, absolutely. I will keep it anonymous, but I can think of one of both. To start with the positive, I can think of where an executive engagement, I'm like a head of product who, when I started at the company said, like, this evaluation is really important to me. And I feel like we can do better in the next one. And, I asked him, I said, well, do I have your commitment to work with this analyst throughout the year and to really prioritize this evaluation for your teams? And will you actually be the one to engage in it? And he said, yes, absolutely, I'll do it. And that made a really big impact. I think just having that lead executive do the demo themselves, really be involved in the RFI before the submission, really looking through the vision and working with his team on, prioritizing what to show in the demo. I think in the end, that made us do an absolute A+ submission, and we really increased our year over year position in that report. And then there's a lot of shared pride at the end when you get a great result, and that that executive knows that they really shaped it. I can think of a bad example from a previous company where I could tell this particular executive did not want to do analyst calls, and we felt it was important that someone with a certain title did analyst calls. And they finally said, okay, fine. So I think at that time I'd focused more on the title of the person than will this be a positive and a productive engagement, and is this executive really going to go in very open and willing to take tough feedback and be really engaged and be a really good listener. And it was a bit of a train wreck. It was like the longest 30 minutes of my life. And I that was where I really kind of came to that conclusion where, okay, if it's going to be pushing somebody too hard and this isn't their thing, then just, find a different executive.
Going to the top, because the different stage and size companies
Yeah.
will have different rules here, but when is it expected or appropriate or valuable to bring the CEO in to an analyst conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really going to depend on the size of the company, even the personality of the CEO. Some CEOs really, really enjoy analyst engagement. Some don't. For me personally, I have done at least one CEO level engagement at every company that I've been involved in. It is usually not for kind of a routine briefing or an evaluation. It's more like really building that relationship at the highest levels. I think the most successful times that I brought CEOs in has been for maybe a half hour during an advisory day, where, or even an hour, where the CEO, first of all, is involved when the analysts typically will present like their view of the market and their view of you. And I think having the CEO there and then having them maybe ask a few of their own questions about what the analyst presented or about the customer inquiries, I think that can be a really great way to build trust, because I think there's nothing more powerful than a really senior executive actually listening. And I think it shows a lot of respect to the analyst and to the firm.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I think that's spot on. At least from my experience. On the other side, it was always actually awkward if the CEO were on like a briefing or
Yeah,
something.
exactly.
It's kind of like, don't you have something more important to do?
Yes,
Whereas,
exactly.
which I get the fact that this is important to them, but it almost
Yes.
felt like there was this big stick trying to convince me, as opposed to just letting the message resonate. Whereas like if an analyst traveled out and is actually doing a strategy day and is
Absolutely.
giving a presentation and sharing something that's actually, it actually shows a great deal of respect that your senior leadership is actually wants to know what you have to say. Whether they agree with you or not is secondary to the fact that I want to learn. And
Yes,
that said a lot to just the culture of the executive team. So I think it's
absolutely.
great advice.
And I think there's also a lot that something that's really powerful about having C-level executives in meetings like that is that it also starts discussions amongst them, which I think is really cool. So let's say that the analyst highlights like, an upcoming space that they think you should be investing in, and then the CEO hears that, he's excited, and then talks to maybe the head of product or R&D, like, well, what do you think? Is that something that we should be dedicating some more focus to? Like those kind of executive discussions, like spurred from analyst conversations, are also really, really cool.
Yeah, I love that. Putting aside the executive engagement aspect, in analyst relations, what are some of the biggest challenges and obstacles to running this function? What are some of the things that really are causing the most inefficiency or the most angst for the typical AR pro?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, different challenges at different size companies and different challenges when I've been like an analyst relations, like lead myself focused on a product area or managing a team. But I think the biggest, and then we'll talk about how AI like kind of helps to solve that, is just the amount of evaluations. There are so many evaluations, and now Gartner is starting to do more with their emerging MQ. Sorry, Forrester is still doing quite a few with their waves, and a lot of IDC is doing MarketScapes, which I think are such a great report, and a lot of the smaller firms are also doing their own evaluations. It is a lot to manage. It is usually a demo and customer references and an RFI, and the RFIs are not always the same. And it can be really difficult on a relationship to say no to an analyst because it can feel personal. Like, well, I don't think, to me, it could feel like, oh, well, I don't think your evaluation is worth my time. When it could be, sorry, I already have 4 other evaluations that are going on right now. The other really hard part of that is that sometimes the firms will automatically qualify you in due to their methodology, which I understand. Like, well, our clients have been asking about you, and we know that you're a major player in this market. Your competitors are talking about you. So we need to include you. Sometimes it isn't like, you can just say, sorry, I'm out. And then they use the data that they can find publicly instead of data that you would provide and the demo that you would provide to score you. And I, to this day, have not heard an example of where that has gone really well.
The analyst firms have made it harder and harder to identify non-participating vendors.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Like, the wave, for example, used to have like a grayed out dot. So that to me as an AR pro said like, okay, you're going to have to take this with a grain of salt because they didn't have, all of the information that a vendor would typically provide. Now Forrester has replaced that with these like halos that talk about customer feedback, which I think is, very valid, but you really can't tell very easily at all if a vendor participated or didn't participate. So I think like one of the biggest AR challenges is just managing stakeholder time when it comes to evaluations like that. Even your own company's strategy for, well, how many evaluations can our company, the bandwidth for participating in, and when are we ready to be in this evaluation? If it's a newer market for us, are we going to do well, or do we want to try to sit this one out this year? So that's probably, that I'd say is the biggest external challenge. The biggest internal challenge, which is such a pet peeve, is just the perception that AR is pay for play. I feel like this comes up in every company. If like you don't do well on an evaluation, like, the other company must have paid him more. I'm like, well, no, like there is, some objectivity to it. And I think that's less and less now I'm hearing than before, but you always have a couple people in the company who think that, which is just disheartening and frustrating. But kind of that internal perception is always an AR challenge too.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of competitors, that smaller competitors especially, have
Yes.
this feeling that, well, the larger vendors are, and I have an opinion here. Well, one, As an analyst, I'd still be an analyst if it were pay for play because I'd be doing really well, you know. But
Yeah.
no one offered to pay me for an opinion. I would have easily thrown away my moral and just
Right.
no. Aside from the fact that that's not actually accurate, there's also the challenge of getting cross-functional teams to find the bandwidth when the company's moving so fast. This is probably something that especially newer earlier stage AR teams that are trying to build out their analyst relations processes and function.
Mhm.
How do you choose what to participate in and what to say no to? Because to your point, analysts might be hurt or offended if you say no, but the reality being you may not have the resources and bandwidth to do all these evaluations and you do have to prioritize.
Absolutely. And I think this ties nicely into some of the areas I know we want to talk about as well, which is the rise of independent analysts and who's really influencing, and then also AI. So for me, one of the most important things as an AR professional is to have a few really trusted resources who are successful salespeople. I always, when I join the company, find a few, and they're usually people who use analyst research really well and who care about it, and have really successful customers. So I will often chat with them and then just say, like, okay, so what reports are you using in your deals? Or what do your customers ask you about? Who do they pay attention to? Do they know of this influencer? Does this influencer's like research or blogs like ever, come up in deals? And I think that's something really important for AR to pay attention to, is less just the firm name, but also like who is influencing sales, because in the end, that's a huge part of AR. I also think it takes year-long planning, and you need to you shouldn't be surprised when an RFI comes in. So what you need to do is look at, okay, what are the upcoming research calendars? And think, okay, especially for, Gartner puts it out there, Forrester puts it out there, IDC does some really good pre-planning, some of the other firms do too, and think in advance and have those discussions like internally with your product leaders. Okay, are we going to be ready for this evaluation this year? Look at the previous ones, look at the criteria. Like, that's really important to not have it be a surprise, and then also to really think and be able to take a step back and go, how do we do in this? And also, do we really meet all of their product criteria? Or would it be maybe stretching it for a couple, and we may not, do as well? And I think to really get into those details and not just think, do we want to be in this magic quadrant? Because there are a lot of executives who will say, well, yes, of course, we play in that market. We want to be in it. This is great. Or, yes, this is a cool, interesting new market, but they don't look into the details of how. And then we can talk about it more later. But I think especially with more independents doing evaluations, there's a lot more of a strategic role that AR can play. And AR can actually do a lot more of the RFIs now that we have AI. And I think that's like when we think about like AR using AI, and we'll talk about it a bit later, but I think that is the most common use case, is using AI to have AR actually fill out a good amount of the survey. So then it's less of a burden on product marketing and product management leaders.
Yeah, and I'm excited. We're going to get to that because I'm excited, and
Yes.
I've got some strong opinions, loosely held, but I've got some strong opinions on what can and should use AI and get value, and where there's risk. So I'll look forward to that. But before we go there, I like what you said, that planning is key. I think if you ask your product colleagues or your SE colleagues or anyone else to help with an evaluation with no notice, shame on you as an AR leader. But if you give them notice and then they balk and say, but we're so busy, shame on them for not planning around it and making sure resources are available. And I've had both situations happen where
Mhm.
we've not given enough notice, so we had to scramble and it wasn't fair to them. And then the third scenario is the analyst, and this is more like the independent or second, third tier firms that are doing evaluations. They might not be planning as well, and they might give you last minute
Yes.
notice. And in those cases, I'm personally okay saying, If we had more notice, we would have liked to have participated, but we don't have resources available at
Yeah.
this time because you didn't give us enough notice. And that's a good bit of feedback to them so they can improve their processes.
Yeah, no, I think it is too. And I think that's also where executive support of AR and executive involvement comes in, and then also recognition at the end of it. So I think if you have a senior executive who really cares about this evaluation, and if they're involved and if they're prioritizing it, it's going to be something that you as, an SE or someone in product management or product marketing is probably going to be more likely to prioritize, because obviously if it's important to that lead executive, it's important to the company. And then I think it's also so important to recognize and celebrate as you go along the evaluation and also publication, the people who were involved, even recognizing them like after a demo went really well and that person really put aside some other projects, recognizing them and then having that executive looped into it. I think it's really important because in the end, like, humans are humans and they want to feel like their work is appreciated and that they're working on something that's important and impactful for the company. And the more that you can just, genuinely have them understand that they're involved in something that is going to really make a difference for the company in the market, I think that helps motivate people in a positive way. And maybe then they'll find that like extra, hour to, really put the perfection on the demo.
Yeah, excellent point. Let's get into the fun topic, which is the massive disruption happening in the analyst community right now.
Yes.
So much change. I don't even know where to start, but I'm not even going to seed the conversation. I'm just going to ask you, which piece of this disruption do you want to start talking about?
So, oh my gosh, there's so much with disruption. Do we want to start with talking about like the rise of the independent analyst and like the new role that they're playing? I mean, that to me in my market that I work in has been pretty significant change.
Let's do that, and feel free to name names because I don't mind mentioning and this is going to naturally lead into the challenges that the Forresters and the Gartners of the world are having, with
Yeah.
layoffs and budgets being trimmed. So, that's what's opening the door for these independents. So let's start with the independents and how that's changing. Because it used to be, if I just have Gartner, Forrester, and maybe IDC, I'm solid. But that's no longer the case.
Right. No, absolutely. And I will name names and it won't be comprehensive. I feel like it's almost like when you're doing recognition on a wave or an MQ and like you're always going to leave someone out. So these are just, a couple of examples. And I think part of this is even stronger because of the market that I'm in. So was in the cloud security AI market. So there are really, really, really strong Gartner, Forrester, IDC analysts who cover our market. We work with them closely. They're an invaluable part of our program. We'll, talk about them later. There are also a handful of independent analysts whose influence is really different, but it's also very strong. So remember how I talked to you about, like, I always make a couple of friends with sales reps who are really impactful. So one of the first conversations I had with a sales rep is a woman who works on the West Coast, and she has a lot of really, really great tech companies. And she'd said to me, she's like, you need to work with James Berthotti. I'm like, who is James Berthotti? Because I was brand new to the company, and like this was the first time that they had analyst relations at Wiz. Our wonderful product marketing team was, working with some of the bigger firms and, some of the independents. And I just basically said, well, who is James? And she said, he has a really sharp perspective on the market, and his blogs are coming up in customer conversations. And she said, I think it's because a lot of security professionals really like an edgy perspective and something that is, like unvarnished. And James has a really, really sharp perspective. And he's a practitioner at heart. And he loves like a punchy headline. He loves a good meme. And he will go into an incredible amount of detail about the product itself. He's also started to do a lot of like end user recommendations. And so, we started to do some calls with him, brought him in with our product leaders, and they're like, yeah, he gets it. So to me, that's a great example of, okay, so yes, he's, an independent analyst. He has a firm called Latio. They're great. We love working with them. But the barometer for me was I have a sales rep who's very successful and who is telling me my customers care about what he says. Other vendors in the market really care about, what he says. And then I can just tell through my conversations with him, even though it is anonymous, that he is doing a lot of shortlisting. And so that is really impactful. And then I'm going to give one more independent example. So in our space, Francis Odom, who runs SACR, is also incredibly influential. He has a lot of really great C-level executive relationships. I was at a Wiz event with him. We brought a handful of analysts and we walked into it together. And he was introducing me to all of these C-level Wiz customers who he had worked with before and he had brought them together for dinners. He knows our senior executives, well. And so they play really different roles. James was getting really deep into the technology and doing very, very, very detailed assessment on which vendors to choose. Francis, who also is very technical, but also just has such great trusted relationships with C-level executives, we work with them differently than we would work with Gartner, Forrester, IDC. We also have incredibly strong analysts who cover us from every product angle at Gartner. We have a really strong Gartner team. They're going to be doing their first MQ on us this year. So we spend a lot of time with Gartner. We have some amazing IDC and Forrester analysts who do marketscapes and waves in our space. We certainly take those very seriously. We spend a lot of time with them. But the independent analysts, I think, also play a really important and a different role. And I think AR's challenge is finding who are those independent analysts for your market. In finding those proof points, I'm like, well, how can you tell they're making a difference? For me, it was in the people that they connected with and people who asked about their research, in really how much they're focusing on covering our market and the personas that, we target. So that to me is one of the biggest shifts, is just that independent analysts are not just out there writing blogs and trying to get cred on social media. They have C-level relationships. They are doing a lot of shortlisting, and to discount them and not include them, in your AR program, I think is a huge miss.
Completely agree. And I think Wiz is fortunate to be in such a exciting space where they do have really good coverage across almost every firm, because it's a really high value, modern, very innovative, fast moving space. There are other markets that may be a little more mature or a little more niche that maybe they don't have that Gartner or Forrester analyst that's really going deep and spending the time. And so finding these independent, next level firms is even more important. I know from in the HR tech world, Josh Bersin is king. If you don't have a relationship with Josh Bersin, he doesn't know who you are. That's where HR leaders are going to learn about what's new and how to innovate in HR. And a lot of former Gartner analysts have now moved, in the data and analytics space to Bark. You have Doug Laney and Merv Adrian and so many other really wonderful analysts that are now really making a strong move with Sean Rogers and the Bark team to actually provide real depth of coverage in this space, where maybe some of the other analyst firms are just have a different perspective of how they're covering it. So Absolutely. It is the AR team's job. And I think your process of engaging with sales to understand who are their customers and prospects mentioning that are influencing their buying cycle is just a hugely important step.
Yeah, super important. And I'm glad that you brought up Bark as well, because I think there's also I think the narrative out there in the market is, big firms versus independents. But I also think there's some incredibly strong mid-sized firms. I would think about 451 Research or, Kupinger Cole. So it isn't just independent analysts and really big firms. And I think as an AR pro, it's your job to kind of cultivate okay, who are the most important analysts for me in my company? And also what role do I need them to play? I mean, also analysts play a really big role in marketing and in, campaigns. And there are some firms where you can work with them on a thought leadership type of a paper or an infographic. For some that, you can't. So I think finding out who is influencing and then also matching that with your company's goals when it comes to marketing is really important. And that's the kind of thing that AI can't and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but like a lot of it is also a gut feel. Like this person is influential, this person is influencing deals in my market, this person's asking the right questions of my senior executives, so like they get and they're passionate about this space. And I don't think that's something that AI can capture or recommend. I think that's something that needs to be really intuitive, from that individual human who's the analyst relations pro.
So let's talk next about just some of the challenges that Gartner and Forrester are facing right now as kind of like the original 800 and 400 pound gorillas in the market. I don't think it's fair to say Gartner's suffering, but they're obviously having layoffs. They're having to restructure. They're having to rethink their business model, and Forrester's no different. What is your take in terms of clearly they're still important from an AR perspective, and especially if they're covering the market that you're in. But longer term, what do you think's going on there?
So I see Gartner and Forrester really refocusing on their core and on where they're really good. And I think it's a very smart strategy. And it's different for me because we're in a really hot market. So, I'm seeing a lot of the really engaging dialogues online about Gartner and Forrester and their influence. For the market that I'm in, where it's cloud security and AI. There are so many analysts covering this. I have not seen an analyst transition. I have not seen reports getting delayed. If anything, I'm seeing more and more coverage in my areas. Like we'll tackle Gartner first. So I think for us and for our company, there's really not a huge impact. I do think it's very important for all the reasons we talked about, for AR pros to have a strategy that goes across firms and really focuses on the individual analysts and their influence and not just the firm name. But I think it's company by company. And I think, you as an analyst relations pro need to say, okay, so is Gartner's influence changing in my market? For our market, I haven't seen a pinch of difference, which is a really good thing. I have heard in other markets that analysts aren't being, replaced or coverage is being, deprioritized. So I don't think there's a blanket strategy that you can apply. What's really interesting too, like every company has a lot of different ways that they work with Gartner. We also work a lot with Gartner events, and the Gartner events that we do are like the security and risk type events. Those are also really well attended, and we're a sponsor there, and those have been really successful for us. So I think you really need to like do that due diligence on your market. And as I think you really need to make sure that you're driving a ton of value from that relationship. And I feel like we really are. And we have a great relationship with our Gartner analysts. And so kind of those bigger trends haven't impacted us. And, similarly with Forrester, we just had a wave published on our space, and it was, one that we worked incredibly hard on. We did really well in it. We're really proud of it. That has certainly been really exciting for our sales team. We have customers who are really excited about it, analysts really excited about it. I think the wave has a really strong reputation. That has not changed. We also have very strong analysts covering us across all of the product areas that we work in. But I also think that's because we're working in two of the hottest areas. So those are the areas where customers have a lot of inquiries around AI. They have a lot of inquiries about security. So I haven't seen a change to our level of service with Forrester, and same with IDC. I think it really depends on the market that you're in and how you're working with those analysts. I think you need to pay attention to analyst turnover. How many analysts are covering your market? Is that analyst covering so many markets that they can barely even find time for a briefing with you? Are there a multitude of analysts you can engage with who have different types of roles, like a more technical analyst and like a more executive facing analyst? The divestitures and so far any, layoffs have not impacted our area, which is great. But I also think that we're really, really rare in being kind of at the intersection of two really hot markets that are probably driving a lot of revenue and a lot of interest for end users and vendors.
Yeah, no, you are in a fortunate, very exciting hot space, which is not getting any lack of coverage. There's definitely other markets that I'm very aware of that are
Absolutely.
feeling the pinch and wondering if
Yeah.
the ROI of investments with a Gartner and a Forrester worth it because you're not getting the coverage and focus
Yes.
and deep dive expertise. I think you nailed it that it's not about the firm, it's about the analyst. Who are the people
Yeah.
that cover these topics and build a relationship with them and they happen to work at whatever firm. And I also agree with the call out with IDC. I think IDC has done a really great job of gaining even more credit. They've always been very credible and very
Yes.
respected, but I think they're filling in a lot of gaps in the market.
Absolutely. I mean, we're lucky. We work with Katie Norton in application security at IDC, who literally has, I had to tell our team before we worked on an evaluation with her, she has a master's when it comes to like research and, methodology. And like she's incredibly smart and runs a tight research process and incredibly curious and insightful. And she does a great job of publishing as well as she's really active on LinkedIn and, and blogging. And then Phil Buse, who covers CNAP. We've started to work with Michelle Abraham, who's awesome on exposure management. So we're very lucky that we have three very strong analysts who also are very focused on delivering value back to us. So I think the onus is on AR to make sure that you don't just have seats that are sitting there and you don't just do an inquiry, 2 weeks before an evaluation and then ignore it. I think AR really needs to, more than ever, like drive that value and make sure that you're getting the right executives engaged and getting executives engaged at the right time, where you're not just saying like before an announcement a week before, like, please tell me my baby is beautiful and give us a quote about how beautiful my baby is. Like, you've got to, get involved when it's earlier on and it's uncomfortable, and the analyst advice can actually like make an impact on the roadmap or, on the messaging. So I think AR has a stronger onus on us to really drive that value. But I certainly don't think the impact or influence that Gartner, Forrester, IDC have is weakening like across all areas. I think you really need to look at your specific area and pay attention to what the analysts are publishing and the clients they're advising, where they're speaking, and then how useful their advice is to you.
Let's talk a little bit about AI. Two aspects of AI. First, let's talk about, because you mentioned this, hinted this earlier, AI in supporting the RFI response research process. So how are you using AI at Wiz to help scale and support all of these responses?
AI is really helpful to a point. Like, one of the most helpful ways that AI actually makes AR professionals so much more valuable is that you can take surveys you've already submitted and you can have AI crawl them and help you answer questions. So my goal is always, as an AR professional, not to ever send product marketing a blank survey. It's actually helped me also learn the products a lot better inside and out. And by using AI really carefully and only with information that can be shared in an analyst survey, and I think in a controlled way, making sure that AI is pulling from maybe product data sheets or your latest presentation, things you've already submitted, things that are up to date. Like, I'm really careful about choosing what my AI can pull from. It actually makes AR's role a lot more interesting, because you're not just project managing when somebody is going to fill something out, and you're learning the product and learning like, okay, like this sounds like a great answer, or I really need somebody to beef this up. That's a big way that I think most AR professionals are using AI, and it helps a lot. And it also helps us to be able to say yes and do more surveys. Like, even if we may not do a full-on briefing and demo, like at a minimum, we can usually answer most of the survey questions just based on things that we've submitted previously.
And love your opinion on this, because this is something, this is where my strong opinion comes in. We had in a past role, our SEs were like, why can't we just use our customer RFI database, responsive or whatnot, to use AI to look at that and answer the analyst RFI based on customer responses? And yes, we tested it out and we threw away 90% of the responses because the way you answer a customer question is not the way you answer an analyst question. So I
Yes.
made a statement as opposed to asking you a question, Alyssa, but that's how strongly I feel that you can't just assume that. But have you experienced that? Has that been something that you've had to manage?
I have. I tried that at a previous company, and I think it was even before AI got really good
Hmm.
at like pulling answers from different documents. And you're right. I mean, the way that you answer an analyst question is so different than how you answer a customer question. I am also really, really fierce about making sure that the information I'm pulling in is really updated. And often, like if it's a database for just questions that might go into an RFI response, you never know when that was updated. Usually doesn't use the same kind of tone and
Hmm.
wording in there. So to me, that doesn't work. And that's one reason why I really like pulling from previous RFIs that you submitted is that product marketing, product management executives have already reviewed them, okayed them. It's the right kind of language. And then you can use like more recent blogs, documentation, something like that to then make sure that it's even more accurate. But yes, the customer questions just don't work. Very different audience. And often now you're limited to specific characters. Often there are sub questions. So you need to make sure that you really customize those for the analyst.
Yeah, so some of these RFIs are like, I have just one question, broken out into 23 subparts.
I know. I know. They're like, well, we only asked you 10 questions. Like,
What's
actually,
yeah? It's
no.
like this is the simplest RFI. It's only going to take you 6 to 8 weeks to answer one question.
They're getting better, though. I have noticed that the RFIs are getting shorter. I haven't done an MQ survey in a little while, but I have heard from, especially from some of my AR friends that have taken on some meaty magic quadrants, the number of questions is shrinking a bit and is a bit more focused, which is awesome because some of those MQs I've worked on in the past are like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of questions. So I'm glad to see that they're tightening those up a little bit and then tightening up the time frames too. So it isn't like over a 6 month period. It's much shorter period of time, which in a market like ours where innovation is happening so fast, I think that makes total sense to do the whole MQ wave marketscape evaluation in a much shorter time frame.
Yes, and I think there's a general judgment and level of respect from the best analysts to
Yeah,
realize, do I have to ask a very common question, which I know to be a commoditized capability or strategy now? Everyone's
totally.
going to probably get a five, but I'm going to make
Yes,
you spend the time anyway, as opposed to, shouldn't you focus your evaluation on the things that are changing and or the
exactly.
innovation that's happening? So the best analysts do focus as opposed to a laundry list of every potential feature that a solution could have.
Absolutely.
Let me ask the other side of the AI equation,
Hmm.
which is positioning your AI strategy and capabilities to analysts,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of, let's just say, marketing going on. As a marketer, I don't apologize for it. That's our job. But going back to the trust and credibility that we talked about at the beginning, what's the response been and what have you been hearing from the analyst community about the say-do ratio and the
Yeah.
believability credibility ratio of legitimately the advanced AI innovations are only a year or two old. AI has been around for a decade in terms of machine learning and built into capability, but the true conversational AI that's useful and the agentic AI story that everyone has to plaster on their event
Yeah.
boots without any context of what they really mean. What have you been hearing and learning regarding how these messages are being received by the analyst community?
Not surprisingly, there's a lot of AI fatigue. I think the analysts, both analysts who cover AI and analysts who cover any market, but AI is obviously impacting those markets, they're exhausted with every single vendor, whether they're an AI vendor or just a vendor that is in the market, having their AI story. I can just tell they feel like there are some vendors who are doing it really well and who have a differentiated strategy, but a lot of them are just kind of AI washing and putting AI on slides. So one thing that I've really found is analysts are really tired of hearing of AI. They need to see it, and they need to see very specifically, what does AI look like in your product and what are the outcomes for customers? So what I found is, yes, you need to tell your AI story. Yes, you need a couple of really clear slides that articulate your AI story and your strategy. Yes, but if the analysts are going to be really impatient, you need to pretty quickly get to, and here is how this is making a difference for customers, and here is exactly how the product uses AI, and show it to them, and show it to them in detail. So less PowerPoint, less talking, more showing the product and showing the results.
Right. So it's real. It's not vapor. It's not PowerPoint slides.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And not just, telling a great narrative, a great, story. And I feel like where a lot of companies are so focused on getting that story right that they aren't then really getting into the proof points that the analysts really care about.
And as from a messaging standpoint, I'll just stand on my soapbox and say you need both. You need a compelling, differentiated message.
You do.
But that's what product marketers do really well. But when product marketers are asked to build a message that's not based in actual customer proof points or product reality,
yes,
it puts the product marketer in an uncomfortable situation. And from an AR perspective, you lose credibility.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the product marketer's story needs to also have those proof points weaved in. So it can't be like, okay, you have an hour-long briefing. I'm going to spend 45 minutes talking to you about our philosophy and our story and our observation of the market, and then here's the product and here's how a customer is using it. I think it's really important to infuse, to keep people's attention and to really raise your credibility with whoever you're marketing to, whether that's an analyst or a customer or an investor, by weaving those proof points about what customers are actually doing and showing, product screenshots and not just really, really beautiful pictures. I think that needs to be weaved into the narrative so that it's differentiated and not just another AI story.
Great advice. And Alyssa, I knew this was going to be a fun conversation, and it absolutely was. It's a topic we both love talking about. Thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.